It's about the stories of our children getting opportunity to go to college and about mamas and daddies putting nickels and dimes and quarters together to pay tuition. It's about our stories. It's about the hardships and the pain and the suffering. It's about the protests and the marching. It's about the standing. It's about the legislation. It's about all of that. It's our story.
Witness to Grace, a testimony of favor, is a poignant, true life story that chronicles the remarkable journey of W. Franklyn Richardson, from humble and challenging beginnings to honored positions of power and global influence. Witness to Grace gives an intimate portrayal of the rise of one of the most respected religious and civil rights leaders of our time.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Reverend Dr. Leslie Copeland-Tune. I serve as the Chief Operating Officer for the National Council of the Churches of Christ in the USA, which is the largest ecumenical body of Christian churches coming together with 38 member denominations. I am overjoyed to be spending some time this afternoon with one of my favorite people, literally, in the world, Reverend Dr. W. Franklyn Richardson, who is my always pastor, no matter where I am. He is the first person who I called pastor and baptized me. I sometimes joke and say anything that happens wrong with me, it wasn't his fault. But I have the great pleasure of talking to him today about his book, Witness for Grace, a testimony of favor. I feel like, Reverend Richardson, I've been a recipient of some of that grace and favor just through your ministry and through all that you've done for me, my family, growing up in Mount Vernon, New York, and for our community. And it's just a great pleasure to be able to talk to you today. So I welcome everyone, and I'm glad to have you with me.
I'm proud of you. You are certainly a joy to my spirit. And I'm grateful for the leadership that you're providing to the ecumenical church community. And it's dear to my heart. And to have you at the forefront is just an unexpected blessing.
Thank you. Amen. It's anybody who knows anything about me, they know about Grace, they know about you, they know about your leadership and your witness. I often say that I learned at Grace the meaning of the church and the community really being one and being together, and there not really being a separation between the two. I feel like that was part of what I learned growing up at Grace, that we were always part of the community itself, that if there was a school board election, you know, there was something happening at Grace to get people registered to vote, to make sure people knew the issues and knew they were voting. Do you want to say, in this context, we're coming out of an election season that was pretty brutal, actually. We praise God that we survived it and we made it to the other side of it. But just from your experience in working within communities, making sure people understood the importance of voting and getting out to vote, what are your thoughts about the season that we've come through and how your ministry has witnessed to Grace as it pertains to involvement in the community?
Well, you know, where we are now is another step towards another step of progress. We've not reached the destination, but we are at another place of progress. We've been to many places on this journey where we've paused to acknowledge the progress that has been made. This progress in this moment is very important because we've come out of what was a very dark stage in the history of this country. And it's made dark by political leadership, but also dark by the incompetence of that leadership to address the health issue of the day, the pandemic, and the challenges of economic resources and the tensions accelerated around race. All of those things make this a very hopeful moment, but we must not in any measure stop doing what we have been doing because the work is not yet over. There's still yet many rivers to cross, many mountains to climb as it relates to finding our place in America. But we are in a good place. We're in a place of progress. It's rejoicing, it's renewing, and we just got to be good stewards of the moment so we can go forward into the future.
So in Mount Vernon, New York, money earner Mount Vernon, great place to live and grow up. You were really at the epicenter of the global pandemic early on. I mean, New Rochelle was where things kind of started, and Mount Vernon is right next to New Rochelle. And I know you've had a lot to offer at this season and pastoring and also in the community. I've heard you speak a lot about the disproportionate impact that it's had on the Black community. And so how have you negotiated pastoring in this moment and even just being a public witness in this moment of this global pandemic?
The pandemic drove me to the very ground of ministry. It sent me back to the real fundamental issues where people were struggling with existence, with food, with life and death, with health. It caused my whole focus to shut down and become the immediate caregiver and local pastor. During the height of it, I had 3 to 5 grief calls a day, talking to families, trying to get them through. The parade of people to the cemetery, the inability to get to the cemetery, inability to be handled, to be buried. All of those are fundamental issues and people's despair. And that's when, all the other things I do as a pastor, that pandemic called me back to the ground of my ministry. And so I found myself going into the mode of how do you address the needs that the people are having? How do you keep the church being the church without a building? How do you continue to keep people connected without a place to corral them? We had to address that. Then there was the people who emerged as the weeks got on, where we had to, how do we feed the people who have no food? So we're feeding, even now, we're feeding 500 families a week, groceries for a week. About 50 tons of food a week that we distribute. We provided computers for young people who were in school and had no devices and trying to get a virtual education. So like I said, it drives you to the ground of ministry. It's at the grassroots. There's not much space in an initial pandemic for an executive ministry. It is really hands-on being there. For many years as Pastor Grace, I never had to or didn't need it, wasn't necessary for me to be in the deacons meeting I'd meet the deacons once or twice a year. But when the pandemic came, I'm meeting the deacons every week. And together we are strategizing how to keep our church together, how to sustain it, how to address the issues that people are having. They became tremendous partners, and we built even a closer relationship in the midst of the pandemic. So the pandemic changed what ministry was all about. To my thinking, it will affect what ministry will be about going forward. There will be still issues around how we serve, who we serve, what tools we use for serving, how do we integrate virtual with in-person, because all of that's going to be out there for us to, at Grace, we had to build a studio. We built a television studio for us to communicate, and we are 7 days a week virtual. We have Zoom and activities all week. We have 3 services on Sunday, 1 for youth, 1 for young adults, and the adult service. They're all produced in our studio. So it's really an ongoing transformation. We've not seen it yet, how it's going to end up, because we still got some months yet that we'll be dealing with this, and then the road out, and then the pain that people will be in after this is over. People who have not been able to pay their rent through this pandemic and the rent becomes due. People who will be looking for jobs because the jobs were wiped out. What's the impact of the loss of the restaurant industries and all the other industries that have been impacted in a negative way? How do we manage that? And how do we acknowledge the prospect that African-American people are going to be disproportionately affected by it? How do we build confidence to have our community embrace receiving the vaccines and understanding that the consequences of not taking the vaccine are severe? And so these are not settled issues. It's comforting, though, to have credibility at the White House and to have somebody who we can begin to trust and believe his word.
Yeah, somebody who actually wants to address the pandemic and not say it's going to disappear. How about that?
It's going to go away. It's a hope.
Right. Bless its heart. One of the things that I've always appreciated about you is your leadership. And I think just the ways that you have adjusted in the pandemic just speaks volumes to it. I can also say that in moments just personally for my own family has gone through grief and has lost loved ones. And you've just been a great pastor in those moments. I also am thinking about the many dishes I washed in Grace's kitchen back in the day when we used to do things like that, just to serve people in the community, Thanksgiving and Christmas, when we'd send a dish to Grace as part of the ministry that we would do and how we would serve people and just kind of the joy and how you would always kind of show up in those moments. So I feel like part of the witness of Grace is really the way you have led the people of Grace, led in the community. And we've seen so much about, seen such poor leadership over these past 4 years in particular. Well, let's just say in ways we hadn't seen it before. I wonder what your thoughts are about how even leading people, I mean, the fact that you made all these adjustments, and I know because my family is still part of Grace. And so I know about the deacons meetings, I know about everything virtual, and have heard about this firsthand, but ministry is still happening in really vibrant ways. And I think that is, in part due to your leadership. So I'm just wondering what you would say about how it's been to lead and how even being such a, my opinion, phenomenal leader has been part of the witness of Grace.
Yeah, well, it's been trying to remain cutting edge, driven by the need, driven by the motive to address the needs of people. That's where it gets you to the space of being an effective leader. If you are driven by a desire to serve people, it will get you to the space you need to be as a leader. The moment it's about you, that moment you lose command to provide leadership. But if you can be driven and undistracted by the need to serve people, to be the people servant, it will result in effective leadership.
That's good. That's good. I'm gonna have to tweet that because that's really good. Tell me some of the themes of the book, that some of the big themes that people should be looking for in Witness to Grace.
Well, first of all, when I talk about grace, I'm not talking about grace in the limited theological sense. I'm not talking about it just in terms, and I am including that, the salvation, the motif, God's favor towards when we were sinners, God saved us. That is true. But I'm really talking about the broader issue of how God accommodates our humanity and how it is undeserving. I'm talking about grace as the sun rising and the flowers blooming and the moon dancing across the night. I'm talking about grace in the wind and in the agriculture, in the harvest. All these things we didn't buy. Emmanuel Scott said so marvelous one day, we didn't buy the sun, God gave it to us. And that is, in fact, a sense of God's grace. So grace is not just reserved for Christians. Grace is a component of the creation. It's available to all. And if you begin to affirm and see your life through the prism of grace, it is likely that you'll come to have a relationship with the Creator. As grace becomes the introduction to God, to Christ. And so my view of the book is about the whole picture of grace. This is about how the grace of the cosmos, the grace of the ground, the grace of people, anthropology, all of those, yes, he further said, you didn't buy your mama, God gave it to you. It's a gift, right? So when you can put your hands around life and see that you have been gifted, it creates in you a positive attitude that can affect everything else that you do. And so what I do in the book is I try to talk about my life through the prism of God's grace. And I try to point out indications along the way of how it was but the grace of God. Like Paul says, I am what I am, but by the grace of God. So it is that affirming theme that I put forth every way. And that theme came out of reflection. I've come now to my 7th decade, and I have been pastor of grace for 45 years. And I had a surgery, rather major surgery. And so in the process of that, I started saying, I really need to put my hands around what has happened in my life for the benefit of those who will follow me, because I have benefited from those who preceded me. And many of the ones who I benefited while now are in the silent city, sometimes their words have still, one of my great preachers in history, and not so far history, is Gardner Taylor. And sometimes when I get to a flat place, and preachers have this, a place where I don't know what I'm going to say and nothing's coming, I go and read his 5 books. There are 5 books, a series on his preaching, Gardner Taylor. And it's always re-stimulating. It's like a boost, like getting a hot shot to get back up and keep going. So and then Samuel Proctor's book, Substance of Things Hoped For. These books speak after they are gone. And if your life has been so blessed, you have an obligation to try to leave some tracks of how you made it. So that's what these are. I said, I got to do this. I feel a burden to do it. And when I began to reflect on what would inform my doing it, the thing that became most dominant was that it was the grace of God. And so throughout the book, I have pointed to those places where God's grace has been operative.
Amen. That preaches all by itself. We could have a little shout break, right? Right on that. So one of the things that I know about you also as an adult, that you are part of the board of the National Council of Churches. Mm-hmm. I call on you every opportunity I get a chance. But your work within ecumenical life actually started long before I was part of the National Council of Churches. You have been part of the World Council of Churches and done so much ecumenically. I'm wondering what you have to say about the importance of ecumenism in this time when not only has our country been fractured, but the church has been fractured, whether it's evangelicals versus, I won't say versus, but the many divisions that have seeped into the church. What's the importance of the ecumenical movement to you now, and how do you see us kind of moving forward for healing and hope even?
I have a whole chapter in the book called Ecumenism. And I'm thankful that I was able to come to an appreciation for ecumenism when I was General Secretary of the National Baptist Convention. I was the ecumenical officer and General Secretary. And so I did all the global travel. The president of the convention, he had a terrible fear of flying. He gained it later on in his life. Early on in his life, he never had it, but at the end, and so I had to do all the world travel. So whenever the World Church would get together, they didn't know who the president was. They knew who the secretary. So I had a lot of wonderful experiences, encounters, preaching in the Soviet Union and all over South America, different places. And I developed an appreciation in those gatherings, and a broadened appreciation for the fact that in Christ, there is diversity, that we don't need to invalidate each other, that there are many windows by which people come to God, and I don't need to dismiss your window. I just need to make sure that the window by which I'm approaching them is adequate. And so there are multiple windows that people come to God. And the ecumenical house is the house of the Omini, where all of us come together in the same room, right? So that has how emerged my issue and understanding and appreciation for ecumenism. We have a problem in the United States. First of all, the church is often slow to move. That's one of the, globally and domestically. And maybe that's an asset, but that's a reality. I would rather say that in many cases, we are, instead of the headlight, we are the tail light. We come along after the issue is gone, and then we react and make theological propositions about it. We're not often on the front line. And part of the challenge of ecumenism, or the state of the church in America, is that the white church, the greatest schism in the church is between blacks and whites. And the white church has been a co-conspirator in our enslavement and advancement of racism since the 15th century, beginning with the Catholic Church, and beginning with, when we got here in 1619, the evangelical churches co-conspiring with white plantation owners to facilitate racism, and then moving along in that place where providing home and shelter for racist attitudes and participation and affirmation for those who were the leaders of slavery. And then moving into this present moment, providing accommodation to white supremacists in the church, embracing them. And so there's a long ways for the white church to get to. There must be some repentance and some truth-telling and some ownership of the pain and responsibility of the church who should have been driven by the gospel of Jesus Christ to address injustice and oppression, becomes a participant in facilitating that oppression and passing on that racism. That is a difficult place, but the church has got to own that. And I'm fortunate to say that I see every now and then glimpses of some churches that are wanting to approach that in the light of this Black Lives Matter, in the light of what's happening with some terrible things in the moment. And so I'm not without hope, but I must own that the ecumenical family has not totally been opposed to racism. It has perpetuated racism. And so I'm encouraged because I do have some, as you know, some relationships with white denominations around race and reconciliation, and hopefully we can get there. I know this is a long trip, but we've got to go that way if we want to save the whole church. And maybe it is the Black church that's been the suffering servant in America that ought to be the vehicle for bringing healing to the church. But we cannot accept just empty, hollow apology, rhetoric. The rhetoric must be backed up with witness. And so for me, ecumenism today has, for me, grounded in how we deal with racism and perpetuation, how we deal with poverty, how we deal with sexism. These are the critical issues that affect the quality of life of global citizens, and the church ought to have voice to speak to that. And when it has been guilty, it needs to be confessional so that people can embrace them again.
You've definitely, if I can brag on you for a moment, have really been a light in this way through the Conference of National Black Churches, where you're the chair, and having the dialogues and the conversations on race, and having some white denominations to be a part of those dialogues. now that we are moving out of a Trump season into a Biden and Harris administration, and I mentioned that more as the culture and the atmosphere, you know, in the country. What hope do you have that the conversation between Black churches and white churches will move forward? I've seen you call people out. I know those dialogues have sometimes been uncomfortable, but very healing in a lot of ways, because even when the truth was told, it was done in a way I felt that there was love and relationships were being built and nurtured. So what do you see moving forward?
Well, fortunately, our coming together on this was not around political agenda, but was my initial change in the direction of the Conference on Black Church was built around what happened to the Emmanuel 9 in Charleston, when those 9 people studying the Bible were killed by a white racist in Charleston. My heart was touched. And I said, the church cannot go along. Every Christian has been assaulted today. And so I reached out to our denominational leaders, and I reached out to white. I said, let's host them at our regular consultation. And so for 5 years, many of them have come, and some new ones are coming to talk about it. And we're in the process of putting together a curriculum based on the 5 years of exchanges that fosters in 50 cities race conversations at the granular level, at the level of our congregation. So we want to move where not just denominational leaders are talking to each other. How do we get Black congregations and white congregations coming together in a local city to talk about the city's problems and the issues of race? I think this present climate creates a wonderful time for us to proceed, and we plan to next year, to proceed with this agenda, 50 cities, conversations going on about race and reconciliation. Not just race, but how do we reconcile? How do we tell the truth? And how do we own the truth? And we'll see what happens with that. But I think it's something that the church can lead in. The church can lead in this. And there's nobody else can do it but the church. We can do it if we resolve to do it.
Yeah, say more about that. What do you mean nobody else can do it?
Well, I mean that the church has authority, biblical authority on healing and on reconciliation on the basis of love, not reconciliation on the basis of transaction. Society transacts reconciliation. The church ought to be reconciling on the basis of love and appreciation for common humanity. And that's really what I mean when I say nobody else is set up to do it. We're not making no investment, no profits gonna be made, no political position is gonna be gained. It's coming, if it happens, it's coming truly out of a sense of healing our humanity.
Amen. That's good. I received that, and I'm looking forward to seeing and hearing more about that, and looking forward to being a part of it, really, when we are able to do work together. So I know one of the things that I heard often as growing up in Grace is anybody in your house was going to an HBCU. They could do what they wanted for grad school, but for undergrad,
that's right.
They were going to HBCU. So I know a lot about Virginia Union and how it was a place for nurture for you. And I just want to have you say a few things about that, because I think it's such a testimony to favor and witness to grace. You know, I have my daughter just graduated from Hampton. My son is a junior at Morehouse. And they say I raised them to go to HBCU. So. But if you could just say more about that, and even in this climate of how important HBCUs are to our community.
Well, I could say a lot, but let me try to make it narrow. You know, Black people, Black children, Black young people who grow up, they grow up in a culture that does not affirm them. They grow up in a hostile hostile society. And most of us, most Black people, leave somewhat damaged by the experience of America from a self-esteem standpoint. And that has been inherited since slavery. It's the fallout of slavery. It's the continuation of racism. And the Black church and the Black college has been a citadel, a place of affirmation. In post-slavery times, people go to church and get their affirmation, their somebodyness at the church. And the Black college affirmed the intellectual value of African-American people when others tried to make us, define us in the Ivy League institutions as inferior and innately inferior to white people. But the Black school affirmed our ability and gave us affirmation. And listen, it's certainly in the early part of the 20th century, but even in my era, I went to Virginia Union in 1967. I had come out of a school in the urban center in Philadelphia, where I had social promotion. And if you behave, keep quiet, don't cause no problem, you automatically get promoted at the end of the next grade. It makes no difference about testing and nothing like that. Well, by the time I got to 10th grade, I went to my counselor because I was aspiring to be a doctor at that moment. And he told me very succinctly that I was not college material. Well, I was essentially not college material because they hadn't made me college material. They just promoted me right along. But I didn't accept that. I went on to West Philadelphia Community College. I flunked out the West Philadelphia Community College. Then I accepted my call to ministry, and I told my pastor I want to be prepared. He said, well, let me tell you, you ought to go to Virginia Union. I then applied for Virginia Union. Virginia Union identified the fact that I had a reading problem, that I couldn't comprehend, that I couldn't read. And they said, well, what we will do is put you in a conditional matriculation and give you remediation for a year. If you do well in that, you can stay. Well, I did. I stayed, graduated, went on to Yale, went on to earn a doctor's degree, travel the world. And 35 years later, I was the chairman of the board, signing every degree of every child. The kid who was a conditional matriculant is now the chairman of the board, signing everybody's degrees. Well, if that ain't grace, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a powerful testimony in so many ways, that the world has learned from you and gleaned from you and your ministry, that, the HBCU, the embracing of not only the Black church, but of HBCUs to make sure that we're taking the seed and watering it and planting it and watering it, and then knowing that God has given the increase. I mean, it's just an incredible testimony of favor, as the book is called, Witness to Grace, Testimony of Favor. But it just is, every time I've heard you talk about this before, and I just feel so encouraged, because I feel like, as you mentioned, so many of our young people are dismissed, they are, become criminals just because of the way they look, or even if their pants are, like whatever the case may be. And yet we know a different story about them, that God created them to be different, which is why I think this book is really just really going to bless a lot of people. And I'm hoping everybody will run out and get it if they don't have it already. I know on Cyber Monday, you're going to give partial proceeds to UNCF to continue the work that is being done at HBCUs and Virginia Union. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I feel that I've been let me tell you, without Virginia Union and HBCU, my life would have drastically been different. And it is though it was a great gift of grace that God put an institution like that where I could get access to it. Because without it, I could have never achieved what I have. And so I am paying forward I work very hard as chairman of the board of the Virginia Union, and we are in the process of transforming it to a best-in-class institution. But it's a lot of work, but it's not work for me. It's just a work of love. I'm so grateful that I can give back to it. And so when we were looking at this Cyber Monday approach, I said, let's give 10% of all the proceeds to the book to HBCUs and Virginia Union. And so that's our plan. We also reduced the price on Cyber Monday to $16.95 just for that one day. It's a $27 book, but it's reduced to $16.95. We're trying to encourage, what we're really trying to do too is take this book, another Black authored book, and put it at the status of best-selling New York Times bestseller and Amazon bestseller. So we have multiple goals, and I'm so grateful to people like you and pastors who are embracing the book and pushing it around the country through their own social media and their emails. Several pastors involved in it. Another daughter of our church, Tamika Mallory, did a big virtual for me, and she's got like 1.5 million followers. She's pushing it. So it's a lot going on. My daughter, Orchid, is an executive vice president for IAB, which is the International Advertising Bureau. And I never knew what she did. And she tried to explain it to me, but I couldn't understand it. But then finally she said, Daddy, you need a paid advertising campaign for your book. And I said, well, what's that? She said, that's what I do, Dad. That's what I do. So she jumped in and is doing that. So there's so many Virginia Unions doing a big piece. There are a lot of people trying to get this to come. And so, I welcome those who are listening with you today to help us get to that goal and help us get the book out as its value to help go into the cerebral collection content of the African-American community.
Yeah, I mean, I think about, so much of what you said is true, but it's not only, if you think about it, you benefited from Virginia Union, but I benefited from Virginia Union, right? Like my spiritual formation is a direct result of your ministry. And not just you, my mom, my sister, like that my Uncle Jimmy, we've all kind of gotten so much spiritually and grown so much from your ministry that, that's like the trickle effect of what that one decision of Virginia Union to give you a chance has, trickled into my life, my ministry, my children, and so on and so on. So it's the blessings from generation to generation that is part of it.
It's grace.
It is grace. It is grace completely, which I really, really appreciate. So I guess as we wrap up, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and we're coming up on this holiday weekend, Thanksgiving. We've been asked not to travel. These are trying times for so many, as you mentioned before, so many giving out 500 meals, helping people through the rough places and rough patches, which is what I've always known Grace to do and the Black church to do, right? Like that's where we know what it's like to struggle and how important it is to make sure we're helping each other through the rough times. So I wonder, what do you have to say? There are these trying times. This book seems to me that it is just perfectly timed to be able to give the kind of encouragement that is needed in this season. And what kind of final things would you say about
it's interesting. When I was writing the book, it was supposed to come out in April. And when April came, the pandemic had set in. Publishers were no longer publishing. Shippers were no longer shipping. So the country is shut down, the world that matter. And they delayed it and they said, well, we don't know when it's going to come out. So it provided me some opportunity to further reflection. So I wrote an epilogue to the book, and the epilogue speaks to the pandemic. And I talk about finding the grace of God in the midst of the pandemic. And the pursuit of God's grace in the pandemic is to ask some questions. The questions like, could it be that God deposited in the DNA of our humanity the capacity to trip a virus if corruption became so great, if the distribution of the wealth of the world became so out of balance, if we were destined to destroy ourselves with the climate out of control. What could it be that God had called us to a reset and had us to recognize that that all of the barriers in our humanity are false, because the pandemic does not respect national borders. It does not respect class or gender. Could it be that God is resetting us? And then I said at the end that, will we just start over, or will we start again as a result of this pandemic? All of this that is going on, the parades of our loved ones to the cemetery, the pain and suffering that's gone on, even the tensions of race that have become unraveled in this whole circumstance. And to have a corrupt, and I take the privilege to say this, a corrupt president presiding over this worst time in 100 years in American history, global history. Has all this come together because God's trying to say something to us? Is God trying to get us to reevaluate what's important? Is he calling us to see and know our vulnerability? And is it not, and is it grace? Is it his grace that lets this happen now to keep us from self-destructing or eliminating the creation? Is this a function of grace? Is the pandemic, as bad as it is it a function of grace? It very well may be. And so I talk about that as the epilogue, and then I talk about how out of that also rose the Black Lives Matter reemergence of the inequity of challenges of race, the original sin of America. So that's really what I kind of view the pandemic as, an opportunity to self-examine what's important. All of us have had to ask ourselves that. What's important? What's really important? And then try to move on and affirm that as we go forward.
Yeah. One of the things that did a bright spot of hope, what you've said is hope-filled, I think. Another bright spot is having the names discovered of the 5 women who founded Grace, who we grew up not knowing their names, but that certainly is, talk about a witness to grace.
Witness to grace, yeah. Rachel Pilgrim, one of our little girls. As a matter of fact, I would take people all over the world every 2 years at Grace. Her mother started her when she was very little, and right till the time she went to college, she always would go with us. So I got to know her very well. And then she graduated from Cornell, and then went to Columbia, where she did this paper, and the New York Times embraced her, and she found the 5 names. She said she'd come to church all those years and wonder who were those 5 women. And isn't it right that the women who created our church 132 years ago, are finally getting recognition? That name, he knows my name.
Yes.
Yes. Call my name. What's my name?
That's right. Say their name. That was definitely a bright spot in the middle of this. And my mom is very proud to have taught her Sunday school and new members.
Yes.
Children. But yeah, definitely a witness to grace and a testimony again to your life, your ministry, and how those seeds you deposited in us, myself, and so many others like Rachel, are just blooming and blossoming. So I'm so glad you wrote this book. I'm so glad we have an opportunity to delve more into witness to grace, testimony of favor. And I'm really grateful to have had this time to just talk to you and share with you. We could go on for hours, but
for sure.
For sure, without a doubt. But thank you so much for your time. And I've enjoyed, of course, our conversation. If you are listening and watching and you haven't had a chance to read Reverend Richardson's book, I commit it to you. You can read it over the holiday weekend since we're not supposed to be out shopping. Anyway, shop online. And once you're doing your shopping, make sure on Cyber Monday you put a copy of the book in your cart so that you can give a copy to someone you love, as well as read a copy for yourself. It will be a blessing to your life. The name of the book, again, is Witness to Grace, A Testimony of Favor. We thank you again, Reverend Richardson, for this time. It's been great to see you and to talk with you a little bit about the book.
Well, again, I am so proud of what you are doing, and it is a cause for celebration. We never had an African-American woman as the Chief Operating Officer of the Council of Churches, and how proud I am. God bless you.
Witness to Grace, A Testimony of Favor is available for purchase. Get your copy today from Amazon.